The meeting is now being recorded, so I'll take the sederunt of the Employee Issues Forum on the 7th of March 2023. I've noted we have Councillor John Anderson present. Is Councillor Brogan present? Okay, and apologies from Councillor Buchanan. We have Councillor Convery present, Councillor Cowie, Councillor Gray? No. Councillor Handybode is present, as is Councillor Loudon, with apologies from Councillor Nelson and Councillor Robb. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. On to agenda item number 1, declaration of interest. Are there any declarations? Somebody's got it. No. Moving on to agenda item 2, minutes of the meeting of the Employee Issue Forum held on the 8th of November 2022, and this is in pages 3 to 6. Can I move those minutes as a correct record? Can I have a seconder? Thanks, Jerry. Minutes approved? Right, moving on to items for consideration. Agenda item 3, council-wide workforce monitoring, October to December 2022, and this is in pages 7 to 28 of your papers. Can I ask Kay to speak to this report, please?
Thank you, Chair. And this is our usual council-wide workforce monitoring report, as you say, this one covering October to December last year. So in terms of the employee information, Section 4 takes you through attendance statistics, and you can see the Council's absence rate for December was sitting at 7%. In terms of annual trends, based on that figure, the projected rate for the year 22-23 is 6%. In comparison with December last year, then psychological and respiratory conditions are the main reasons for absence that we can see over that piece, and people will remember some of the respiratory conditions that were kicking around in December in particular. Despite that, you can see contained within the bullets on that page that respiratory conditions have decreased by just over 2,000 days over that period. And you can probably get a little flavour of that in terms of our COVID figures had reduced quite significantly, but our other respiratory ailments actually had been on the increase over that period. As you would expect, Section 5 is taking you through occupational health, and there's quite a lot of activity in terms of that section over that October to December period, with over 400 employees being referred for a medical examination, and similarly well over 400 employees attending physiotherapy treatment, really just trying to get through the main aspects of support for the workforce. And psychological absence, as we see, has been a bit of a feature over the piece, and over 500 employees were referred to the employee support officer during that period, and a substantial number also attending PAM Assist counselling service. Turning on to Section 6, that's about accidents and incidents, and there's slightly better news here in that although we had 365 accidents and incidents, the figure has decreased by over 100 in comparison with the same period last year. And again, those accidents and incidents are predominantly around about the minor category. Section 7 takes you through discipline, grievance and dignity at work. So we had 46 disciplinary hearings, with action being taken in 43 of those cases. Section 8 takes you through leavers and exit interviews, and I think I've been fairly consistent in the reporting to say our labour turnover is on the increase, and over that period we had a labour turnover figure of 1.1%, and that's given us a projected figure of 5.1% for the year, so high in comparison with previous years, but unfortunately consistent with a number of other organisations. So as you would expect, there's lots of activity around about recruitment, so well over 2,500 applications over the period, and from those that declared themselves disabled, we had 62 applicants, 31 being shortlisted for interview and 5 being appointed. And from those from a black and ethnic minority background, we had 162 applicants, 38 were shortlisted for interview and 12 were appointed over the period. And unfortunately, although we had 32 veteran applicants, with 24 being shortlisted for interview, none were appointed over that particular period. In terms of staff and watch, we've got a very slight decrease, which is what we'd be expecting at that time of year. So I'm just asking the forum to note the information in the report and happy to address any questions, Chair.
Thanks, Kay. Can I open it up to any questions? Councillor Loudon.
Counselling. Oh, sorry, my red light has just come on. Is that me switched on now? Yeah, okay. Thanks, Chair. It was a quick question about the PAM Assist counselling service at 5.1, where it says all of the referrals were made through managers and none directly by employees. Does that mean it's an option to self-refer, that employees could do that themselves? And if it is an option, are we looking at the reasons why people aren't doing that, if psychological conditions are one of the sort of joint main issues for reasons for absence?
Sorry, Kay, do you want to answer that?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Loudon. Yes, employees do have the option of self-referral. I think we would be encouraging people to make use of that rather than necessarily always come through their line manager. It may be that we need to re-emphasise that option in communication, and helpfully we're tendering for our occupational health contract, so it gives us another opportunity to send out some further communication, just highlighting those as options for individuals. Thanks.
Councillor Loudon, are you satisfied with that? Councillor Anderson, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points regarding, first one regarding 8.4, where with 382 members of staff leaving between October and December. We do have a big issue trying to fill posts, but it then goes on to say with 2,579 applications, and yet we don't seem to be able to fill these posts. I know I'm not talking the October to December ones because they're relatively new, but overall, it just seems we seem to be getting loads of people wanting to work for us. Are they applying for the wrong jobs? What is it? And the second thing I'd like to ask as well is if it's possible, 12.1 financial implications, and I know they're all accommodated within the existing budget. Is it possible to put in here what the absences are costing the council? Thanks.
Okay, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, thanks. Unfortunately, speaking to colleagues across Scotland, we're all struggling with the turnover aspect. In fact, it's not just councils; just in general, there is a shortage in the labour market. And I absolutely get your point about we've still got 2,500 applications. But you might have multiple applications from the same person. It might not be suitable for that particular role. And certainly, if I speak to recruiting managers, they'll sometimes talk about they're not getting the quality coming through. So you'll know in our workforce planning actions, we are looking at grow your own, our employability routes. So maybe taking people that are further from the jobs market and taking them through into being suitable for the roles that we've got. And even we're trying some innovative stuff. You'll have seen some of the social media campaigns we've had out, the jobs fairs, etc., just trying to catch people. But when we look at the very specifics, so it'll come as no surprise, we've been looking at veteran applicants in particular. There's about half of them don't turn up for interview or have got a job ahead of coming in. So it just tells you it's very hot in the labour market just now. So we need to be fleet of foot and trying as far as we can to maybe grow people into the roles that we've got. If you're okay with that, the second point round about absence, we don't currently gather the total cost of absence for a couple of reasons. One, you'd have to be gathering information about replacement costs, etc., if you want to know that figure in an accurate form. But I suppose what you could do is just take the straightforward percentage and apply it to employee costs in general for a ballpark figure about absence.
To cover some of the, I know some you don't need to, but other areas you will need to have somebody in that post while they're off sick.
Yeah, and that's the bit that we don't collect that information that way. So there might be overtime coming through, but you wouldn't know particularly what it was for, whether it was for covering a particular absence or an increase in workload or whatever it happens to be. So we don't collect it in that way in order to take it back out again. So what we have got is the percentage, which you could apply to an overall figure.
But it is possible to collect that information if you wanted. Because the directors would just need to tick a box saying
yeah.
paying that overtime to cover absence or whatever.
So you'd have to have the payroll system ready to do that, and actually it would be quite labour intensive. You would need each manager to be recording it in that way. So you'd probably be adding to the costs in order to get it back out again, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kay. Any more? No? Can I ask for the recommendations on page 7 to be agreed? Thank you. To agenda item 4, Community and Enterprise Resources Workforce Monitoring, October to December 2022. This is on pages 29 to 36 of your papers, and can I ask Elaine Maxwell to speak about this report?
Thank you, Chair. As you say, this is the workforce information, monitoring information for community and enterprise resources for the period of October to December 2022, and outlining similar to what Kay's just presented in terms of the council-wide. So in terms of the form, I would note that at section 4, the resources absence figure for December was sitting at 8%, and that figure had increased by 0.3% when comparing that to the November of last year, and was sitting 1% higher than the council-wide average. And again, looking at December of 2021, we can see that the figure had actually increased by 0.6%. Again, similar vein, looking at the trends based on that data is showing that the resource absence figure for the period for the year 22-23 would be sitting at 7.4%. Obviously, would be aware that the forum would be concerned about the level of, the absence rates within the resource, but certainly what I could give a bit of comfort for the forum is that what we can see is that percentage is decreasing in January, and actually we're seeing an improving figure for February as well. Going on, looking at the information detailed in Appendix 2, which outlines the occupational health referrals. And again, as you would see with the level of absence that I've already outlined, the attendance, the occupational health referrals had increased by 8 compared to the previous period, up to 337. And obviously the detail is in Appendix 2. Further point to note at 4.3 in terms of the increase of accidents and incidents that have been recorded for that period, and again particularly in comparison to the same period of the previous year when there's an increase of 17, showing that there's now there's 49 accidents and incidents recorded. Again, looking at the levels that were reported COVID, what we can see is that those numbers are becoming level, to what we previously recorded and reported to these forums pre-COVID. And that vein is similar to section 4.4, when we can see that there was an increase in the employee relations activity, where there were 32 disciplinary hearings held within the resource, again showing an increase of 24. But again, just to provide a bit of comfort to the forum, that those figures are very similar to those that we would presented to this forum prior to the COVID pandemic. The other point to note would just be at section 5.1, where you can see that there was a decrease of 74 in the number of employees in post between September to December, and the forum will be aware within the resource that will be predominantly related to the seasonal intake in terms of those fixed term contracts ending. And with that, I would just ask the forum to note the employment information, and be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine. Can we open out to questions? Councillor Convery.
Elaine, see the disciplinary. Why have we got so many? If we go back to Kay's report, which was council-wide, there was 40 odd, and in this, for one department, there's there's 32 disciplinary hearings. What's the background to all that?
Thanks, Councillor Convery. Obviously, I know you're very familiar with the resource and the makeup of the resource and being very front-lined based and obviously the numbers within that resource. Obviously, what we can say is that we don't go straight to disciplinary hearing or fact-finding for everything. We very much have to comply with our policies and procedures, and if there's issues and concerns about conduct that are raised with personnel, we certainly robustly review that to make sure that actually the correct process is being followed. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that I can't predict, because it is very reactive in terms of what happens within individuals. And but I suppose I'm just asking to give some reassurance that we within the personnel section certainly make sure that action has been taken as and when it is appropriate. And there's certainly a bit of robustness within our teams to make sure that anything is consistent across the council, Jerry.
Thanks, Jerry. Can I ask that the recommendations are agreed on page 29? Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 5, presentation on sustainability and climate change. And can I ask Kirsten Allen to present this?
Thank you, Chair. I'm hoping to just share my screen shortly so that everyone can see that. And thanks very much to Kay and Elaine for the previous reports as well. Okay. So I suppose, first and foremost, hi everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to attend today's forum, both in person and online, of course. And I'm here today to give a quick presentation regarding climate change and sustainability within South Lanarkshire Council. So, as it says at the top of the slide, my name is Kirsten Allen and I am a Sustainable Development Officer, and I'm based within Community and Enterprise Resources, albeit with a kind of board-wide or council-wide influence. So just to start, today I'll talk a bit about governance, and we'll talk about just around kind of SLC's sustainability and climate change agenda, and a little bit around the structure. So today the structure is governed via the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee, and this was launched in 2020, and its remit is to basically oversee and make strategic decisions on how to accelerate the pace and scale of action which is needed in response to the climate emergency. We also have a Sustainability and Climate Change Steering Group, which is attended by heads of service and senior managers from across the council. And it's our pleasure to also welcome Alison Brown, who has recently joined South Lanarkshire Council as Head of Enterprise and Sustainable Development and as Head of Service for this. The rest of my presentation will then cover a kind of a bit of an introduction to what sustainability and sustainable development is even, Scotland's national targets and how we're localising these in SLC, and then I'll briefly cover the kind of interaction between sustainable development and employee issues as relevant to this committee, and then hopefully we'll finish up with some thoughts for some food for thought for the future, and maybe take a bit of discussion as well. So I'll just kind of slide over to the next slide. So I know that this kind of term's probably been around quite a lot and everyone's familiar with the term sustainable development, but just to provide a quick summary. Sustainable development is really about maintaining a stable level of economic growth and employment whilst also reducing resource consumption, producing clean alternative energy, protecting the natural environment and enabling a quality of life which is fair, inclusive and does not disadvantage anyone. These are often referred to as the 3 pillars or dimensions of sustainability. And sustainable development is not just about considering the present, but it's also about looking forward at how our actions and use of natural resources impact future generations. It must be said that climate change presents probably the single biggest threat to sustainable development, and its widespread and unprecedented impacts are disproportionately affecting the poorest and most vulnerable, both globally and here in Scotland and in South Lanarkshire as well. And as a society, not just as a council, we need to consider the impacts that climate change may have on our development and growth and how we adapt and reduce these impacts. If we can reduce our contribution to climate change, we are helping to minimise these impacts and in turn able to develop more sustainably. So it's a kind of brief summary into that. So next slide is just kind of detailing the national targets, of which there are many. So Scotland has set quite ambitious climate change legislation, and that sets a target date for net zero emissions of all greenhouse gases by 2045. And that net zero refers to the balance between the amount of greenhouse gases that's produced and the amounts that's removed from the atmosphere. And there's also interim targets of 75% by 2030 and 90% greenhouse gas removal by 2040. And how these targets are achieved are outlined with the Climate Change Plan 2018 to 2032, which was recently updated in 2020. And public bodies have been required to act on climate change for many years. And statutory requirements have strengthened over time. The statutory framework for climate action and reporting is outlined by the Climate Change Scotland Act 2009 and the Climate Change Public Bodies Scotland Act as well, which I'm sure we're familiar with. So how are we localising these? So national goals, of course, they require local implementation, and delivering these national targets presents a huge challenge in terms of the pace of action and both the skills and the finance that's required as well. The public sector is crucial to the implementation of national and local climate policy. Public bodies are also expected to show leadership as well by continuing to reduce their own emissions quickly. Most sectors, including the public sector, will now need to reduce emissions close to zero almost entirely for Scotland to meet its national climate change goals. As I've detailed in my slides, Section 44 of the Climate Change Scotland Act places a duty on public bodies to act in a way that is best calculated to achieve Scotland's emission reduction targets, which I spoke about previously, and it's also required of public bodies to act in a way that is best calculated to deliver Scotland's adaptation programme and overall, perhaps most simple, behave in a way that it considers is most sustainable. In addition, there's also been statutory requirements for public bodies to report annually on our compliance with these climate change duties, and this statutory compliance is only set to increase, and most recently a deeper reporting requirement was added in November 2022 as well. So we should start to see an increase in these statutory requirements going forward and as we enter into closer periods towards 2045. So in terms of South Lanarkshire Council and what we're doing here, our first strategy was launched in 2007. And previous highlights include reducing our carbon footprint by a further 50% between 2017 and 2021. This reduction was, of course, partly due to changes in service provision throughout 2020 and 2021 because of COVID, but it was also due to a sustained and successful effort to reduce energy and fuel consumption and implement more energy and fuel-efficient technologies by South Lanarkshire Council. Our most recent strategy builds on the previous strategy term of 2017 to 2022, and it sets out our priorities through to 2027. And in total, it's important for me to mention this, South Lanarkshire Council has achieved a 65% reduction in carbon emissions versus its 2005 baseline. However, it must be said that also that this figure will change or rise potentially due to changes in reporting and as we start to look at previously out of scope emissions as well. This success has been achieved through engagement with other departments and partners and target setting via our 5-year action plan, which also runs parallel to the strategy, all of which can be found on the Council website. Other success stories include a range of air quality improvement projects and an education programme involving communities, businesses and schools, the development and launch of the Good Food Strategy, an increased number of fuel-efficient and electric vehicles within the Council fleet, including pool cars, sweepers and even a minibus as well. We also have expanded our EV charging network and will look to increase our recycling facilities for many of our 320,000 residents, with most of our non-recyclable waste also being sent to energy from waste facilities and almost next to nothing being sent to landfill now. Importantly as well, we also have an extensive catalogue of Learn Online modules for staff and have been recently hosting climate literacy training for elected members as well. So that's just some of the positive news stories coming out of South Lanarkshire Council. So I suppose the reason we're here today is the Employee Issues Forum, so I thought I would try and pull out some kind of interesting, maybe some lines between climate change and employee issues. So all workers, whether they work indoors, outdoors, offshore or travel for a living, are increasingly vulnerable to disruption, damage and potential injury from climate change impacts, notably windstorms, flooding and even heat waves. Climate change is especially a health and safety issue as well, and as a result of climate change we will see an increase in pest and disease species, rising temperatures which will lead to an increase in heat stress and fatigue related issues, exposure to chemicals, air pollution and other health related detriments including asthma, cardiovascular conditions and also an increase in adverse weather events such as storms and flooding, which can also lead to an increase in accidents, trips and falls, safety lapses as well as unsafe working conditions. And it is often, for me, it's probably most important to say, it's often frontline workers who are most at risk of these, and it's also those who are economically and socially disadvantaged who are more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change as well. Positively, this agenda isn't all negative. There are some opportunities as well, and opportunities for recruitment and retention. Workers want to be involved in this agenda. We have a lot of enthusiasm for sustainability within South Lanarkshire Council as a whole. And it's quite interesting that I've managed to find a survey that said 63% of millennials would like to learn would actually like to take part of a job or a company that wasn't socially or environmentally responsibility. So I think I've actually bundled that up. So 63% of millennials wouldn't accept a job for a company which wasn't environmentally or sustainability focused. And it's also said that 63% of employees today would like to learn more green skills in order to become valuable in the workplace. Importantly, an Adaptation Scotland survey as well found that only 16% of trade union reps felt their workplaces were adequately prepared and equipped to deal with climate-related risks. And 72% of those trade union reps also said that climate impacts were happening more frequently and were having more severe effects on their workplace and workers. So suppose some thoughts for the future before I'm more than happy to take some questions. So I think every job in the future will be a climate job, it won't just be seen as a job of a sustainability team or a sustainability champion. We're already experiencing the impacts of climate change in SLC, and multiple strategies will be required to reduce the risk of work-related issues which stem from climate change. Employer and worker preparedness is key to ensuring both action and resilience. For example, encouraging staff to complete learn online modules relating to sustainable development and climate change. This will both increase awareness and scope for climate conversations in the workplace. Perhaps embedding climate change related risks into emergency plans and risk assessments, and also considering climate change impacts within occupational health surveillance. And then of course the way that we can perhaps mitigate and look to adapt to these as well is taking a process of hazard recognition, completing vulnerability assessments, and then looking to embed control strategies in relation to climate change risks as well. So I think that just takes me just within the 10 minutes that I've been given. So thanks very much for everyone, both online and in person, for listening to me today. And I'd be more than happy to take some questions as well.
No. You've got off lightly there, Kirsten.
Maybe I'll just present it to
Yep, Jerry.
So Kirsten doesn't. Climate change is about, that's a major issue for the world, not just South Lanarkshire. My observations of the whole thing is quite simple. South Lanarkshire and every other council area is getting dirtier and clattier and mankier. It's absolutely shocking when you look at the roads, you look at the verges. So there's a total contradiction there when you're saying people wouldn't take a job. They'll take a job if the money's right. That's what people work for, money. They don't work for changing the climate. Get that out of your head for a start. But there's a contradiction. We talk about climate change, but we do nothing about it because you really need to put a lot of money into changing people's habits. And I just see a total deterioration everywhere I go. No, even in this country, every country you go to, it's just litter, and I don't think there's any pride anymore. People don't. It's away from my door. It's his door. It's her door. It's just I don't see us getting out of this. We're spending as a council fortunes picking up fly tip, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. So do you not think there's a wee contradiction there, Kirsten, where people are all wanting to get engaged? It's the same people that are throwing the litter away.
No, thanks very much, Councillor. Yes, I suppose. I mean, I don't think it's up to us to necessarily solve all the world problems in terms of this committee, definitely. But I think my comment would be around maybe perhaps young people and the younger workforce being more engaged in this agenda and looking for those kind of climate jobs and green jobs. But I do take your point. Obviously, litter, visible litter, and fly tipping is an absolute problem in society, not just in South Lanarkshire but across the country. And I think we're hoping to see the positive introduction of the deposit return scheme, because as you'll know, that a lot of this litter that we do pick up will be things like cartons, aluminium cans and plastic bottles. So with the introduction of the DRS, we're hoping that we can try and incentivise people to take those bottles and plastic things back to the shops. Of course, there are challenges around the implementation of that project at the moment. In terms of civic pride, I would agree, and perhaps yeah, it's just a case of well-designed council services. I know that fly tipping is an issue around about the bulk uplift charge, and it's an issue in the neighbourhood I live in as well. So we do have all these challenges, but I think maybe perhaps the issue of litter and fly tipping and excess bulky waste is perhaps a reflection on our consumerist patterns that we tend to show at the moment in terms of how much resources we are consuming. And we know that it's not sustainable going forward, so we will be trying to embed more circular economy thinking going forward, and these are the big challenges that as a society we will have uncomfortable decisions to make going forward. But I do absolutely appreciate your point in terms of the contradiction between what we're doing outside and what we see as a whole, and it almost feels like we're waiting for that big bang moment to happen as a council as well. So these are, I wouldn't say that these are unique issues to South Lanarkshire Council or Scotland in general. These are very much global and societal challenges that we face. But yeah, I do take your point on board, absolutely. But thanks very much for your questions.
Kirsten, can I just ask a wee thing? So we'll see the deposit return scheme. You're saying like people will pick up the rubbish and take it to shops. So a couple of people, this has been brought up to me. So what happens if you haven't got a car to take all your cans and bottles to the local shop? I can see rubbish increasing more, especially if you're taking away the recycling element. Has that been thought about? Because me, for one, don't have a car. I've got 5 kids who all drink juice, so I'm going to have to go to my local shop with bin bags full of cans. And the other thing is, you need the return from the waste. You need to spend that in that shop. Say you don't shop in that shop. Is that, you know, I don't know if that's relevant to what your presentation is, but is that something that's been thought about with the deposit return?
Thanks very much, Chair. I mean, I couldn't possibly comment too much. Of course, I'm not located within waste, but from a kind of sustainable development perspective, we're hoping that the deposit return scheme starts to kind of prevent the waste entering the environment more so than people collecting the waste and then taking it to their local shops, of which probably people would be able to do anyway. I think it's like a kind of the point of the whole thing that there would be multiple vending locations for these machines within any shop. So you could take them to your local Co-op or your local Tesco, which hopefully would be within adequate walking distance. But I suppose what you said about your kind of car-centric society as well maybe brings out the issue of the new kind of policy development in the new National Planning Framework 4, which places emphasis on having a 20-minute neighbourhood so that people who don't have access to cars are able to access all the facilities that they need within walking distance, of course. And it must be said as well that the deposit return scheme is a very well implemented project across Europe. And it's very common nature for people in Europe to take their bottles and cans back to the shop when they do a shop. So just similarly as you go back now with your bag for life would just be full of 10, 15 cans at the same time. And hopefully they would be, of course, empty, so they wouldn't be as heavy to carry if people had enjoyed whatever was in them at the start. But we do appreciate that it's not feasible for everyone, but I think it's more so just to start to create that sort of environmentally conscious decision making, but also trying to incentivise people as well to take these things back to the shops. And in terms of recycling, we were hoping that the deposit return scheme could in fact remove a lot of recycling from bins in the first place as well. But of course, it's still very early days, and it'll be interesting to see how the project rolls out across Scotland in the coming months and years as well. But thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Kirsten. Anybody else? Right, moving on to agenda item 6, urgent business, which I have none. Wish to thank everybody for coming along, and thank you once again, Kirsten, for your presentation. Thanks, everybody.